We are lighting the candle, and I am Bill Correll, and I have marbles in my mouth. I have with me here one of my dear friends, in fact, an extraordinary woman that I'm really pleased and privileged to be with on an almost weekly basis, Jan Jeremias. So, Jan, how are you doing today?
Okay, Bill, thanks. And you're still in, you might still be in driving mode. Like, I don't know, did you land yet?
I
Kind
can't
of
tell
thing.
you for sure. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. See if I catch up with myself here.
Yeah,
So,
sometimes it's kind of odd because you're moving and then you stop and you haven't arrived, as I say.
well, just to let you know, at home, those of you that heard the podcast from last week know that I recorded it from Florida, actually a place that I'd never been to before I turned around and went down and saw a good friend. But the last 14 days, I have been traveling all up and down the eastern seaboard in my new convertible. Well, it's an old convertible Mercedes. It drives very well, by the way. I've put a little over 3,300 miles on it in 14 days. So lots of people seen. I have gotten velocitized, but between, let me see, Wednesday and today, I put on 1,500 of those 3,300 miles. So I've spent quite a bit of time in that car, and it's quite comfortable. And so I'm here. Now, I told you all that to tell you this, that what we're all about here is empowerment. You know, that empowerment that you feel when you're rushing down the highway on a motorcycle or with the windows open on your car, or if you have a rag top like I do, with the top down, just blowing your hair all over the place. You know, that kind of freedom where there's a little bit of noise and it helps you forget everything going on in your life. And you kind of like can't do anything but pay attention to the beauty of nature and just all of the other things that are going by.
I don't know if I've had that feeling in a while, so I think I'll have to take your word for
Well, we'll see if
it.
we can schedule one.
Yeah, I get it other ways. So I think it's just when you're in the zone or when you feel like you've done something and I don't know, it just makes you feel good.
Yeah, empowerment is kind of when you don't notice you have problems, you know?
That's right.
It's the unnoticeable absence of problems.
I like that. I like that definition a lot.
Yeah. Well, as best I can do on short notice. I just
No, I really do like that definition.
so I just finished eating lunch and seeing some people that I've known for a very long time. The folks that have the Chinese restaurant over here in town, their babies were born about 5 years after they bought this place from the previous Chinese owners. They are now all in high school and college, and they are
Mhm.
grown. They are grown human beings. It's extraordinary to look at them and to just appreciate that. The first time I ever saw them, Linda was coming through the door. Wee Woo was right next to her, and little whoever it was, there are three kids, but they're all gorgeous, and they're American kids. You know what I'm saying? They're not like Chinese American kids. They're just American kids, right? And all three of them have worked in the business since they were old enough to do so. And it's just cool to see them, and fist bump and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, that is fun. And it's, when you see people like that whose kids you've known forever, you know, it's like, I was on Zoom with a friend of mine, and we have a mutual friend who I hadn't seen in a really long time. And when I said to her, "Oh, I miss her. How is she?" or whatever. And she said to me, I said something about the girls because she has two daughters. And she said to me, "Oh, Lacey's going to be 16." And I was like, 16? Like, how did that happen? It's like, so, that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
But in some ways it's really satisfying, and it's always makes me laugh because, a number of my friends never, not that they had to, but they never called me Jan. They would call me Miss Jan all the time. Like, did you say hello to Miss Jan? Oh, hello, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so it's so funny to me. Like now I think back, and it's always funny. It's kind of like when you grow up and friends of your parents, all of a sudden they tell you to call them by their first name, and you're like, you can't.
Yeah, it does feel awkward for a little while.
Yeah, it does. It really does feel very, very awkward. You're like, I don't know if I can do that. But
Well, my brain at the moment is just so full of all of these recent experiences, so much love, so many beautiful human beings all over the place. And I am going to have to sit down and just write out what my itinerary was, because it was truly a making it up as every day I didn't know where I was going to be 2 or 3 days down the road.
mhm.
I had maybe five, possibly six people that I really wanted to make contact with. And I did manage to make contact with all but one. It's kind of an interesting thing, because I drove all the way to Florida, and one of the primary people, I would say one of the top two or three, just ghosted me, for some strange reason. And I'm really hoping that she's okay. But I never was able to get in touch with her until like the fourth day. By the time that I was finally, chatting with her on Messenger or whatever it was, I was already 350 miles away from where I could go and see her. And I wasn't going
Mhm.
back.
Mhm. Mhm.
But she apparently had her some head problems, and like migraines and that sort of thing, and she couldn't even bring herself to text me and say she wasn't well, so. But she finally reached out to me, and we were able to complete that way, and I'll have to just put her down for the next trip. And if she ghosts me again, then I'll do it on the next trip. And if she ghosts me again, I'll do it on the next trip. However, I told you all that so that I could say this. In total, I met with 21 different people.
Wow.
Yeah. And about seven of them are family members that I haven't seen for over 10 years. They're my nephew and his ex-wife. They're two teenage boys that are both playing high school baseball now. And she contacted me out of the blue. They live in Charlotte, and she said, "Uncle Billy, if you're going to be close by here, maybe you can come and have dinner with us some night." And I said, "Okay, let's see what we can do." Well, I wound up getting out of bed yesterday morning and driving from Morganton, where I was staying, down to this place called York, South Carolina, to one of the most beautiful private high schools I've ever seen in my entire life. This thing has got to be on about 75 acres of land or more. And it has a football stadium extraordinaire. In addition to that, a soccer stadium. In addition to that, it just goes on and on and on. And where most high schools might have a baseball field, well, this one has a quad. You can have
Mhm.
four games going on at the same time, so it's a great host for a high
Mhm.
school tournament. And that's where we finally saw him. And then we went and got some lunch afterwards. And I was kind of
Mm.
like, yeah, I was an also ran. Uncle Billy just showed up. The two teenage boys didn't remember me, because the last time I saw them, they were like 2.5 and maybe 4.5. They hadn't even gone into kindergarten. The older one, and he's a senior in high school now. So it was we enjoyed it. They knew who I was by story, and we just had some good conversation, enjoyable time for about 3 hours, and then back on the road I was last night. Drove 600 miles.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds wonderful. And yeah, it sounds really nice.
I might sleep till noon tomorrow, because I have been burning the candle, on both ends here, going to bed late and getting up early. This morning I woke at 5, and I was out the door, heading up home to Willamette from Dover, Delaware,
Mhm.
probably around 6:15. So
Mhm.
just late enough to be able to get something from the continental breakfast deal that they have at the Best Western Hotel.
Yeah, sometimes but I actually like I mean, I like driving early mornings.
Me too.
Mm,
I enjoy it more when it's not on an interstate, but even on an interstate, it's usually just trucks, and at that hour of the morning, not an awful lot of people going to work yet. You know.
yeah, exactly. My favorite time of day anyway, and it's my favorite time to drive. It's kind of like when I do that early drive on Sundays, when very few people are out that early. And
Yeah,
it's nice to not to have to contend with, people going to work.
I agree
But
with you.
locally around the corner from me, there's an elementary school, and they've ended already for the year. I mean, school ended, which I thought was a little early. They ended Friday. But it's so interesting because I went to turn out of my street and everything, and it was like I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's so quiet." Like there's just this quiet, just like that. It wasn't that that kind of sort of energy that it was, and I'm like, "Oh, it's shifting.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
now shifting."
yeah. There's a new normal,
Yeah.
and it'll go that way until probably sometime in August.
Yeah, so it's just it always is so interesting when that happens. It's kind of like that transition, and then I always have a hard time once it goes back to school time because I'm not ready. I'm like, I don't really want summer to be back, summer to end.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, for the whole period of time that I was gone, uh, I mean, I must have stayed in Best Western is our go-to, and we've been doing that for years. I am not getting any compensation from them, ladies and gentlemen. I just want you to know that. I only mention that because we've had some really good luck with them. They treat us well. And I've been really fortunate because the particular ones where I was on this trip, only two of them were anywhere near the interstates, where you could really hear that traffic all night long. So apparently, I've got this really wonderful talent to be able to go to sleep under any circumstances, pretty much anywhere. And it wasn't always that way, Jan. There were times where I would lie in bed tossing and turning for a half hour, 45 minutes, before I finally conk out. But I just have this little routine that I do, counting backwards from 20, and with each breath. And then when I get to 0, I'm just totally relaxed. If I need to do it again, I almost never get past 10, or below, before I'm out. So that was nice. Waking up, that was the part I wanted to tell you about. In those spaces where it was just so quiet, and I got this beautiful Airbnb that was way out in the middle of the woods, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it had been completely redone as if like a Marriott type of a room,
Yeah.
first class all the way, everything in it. I mean, ultra, accentuated lighting, and it just was. You could really set the mood any way that I wanted to. It was so
Mm,
custom and cool, and
mm.
really, really quiet. I would just sit there. I got my yoga done for the first time in 9 days. I was so happy.
Well, there's nothing like sometimes when you find these really when I rented a house for I guess it might have been 2 weeks, maybe it was more, in about 3 hours from Stockholm. I remember Sweden. And I remember it was out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And I got it on that time. There wasn't really Airbnb, but there was VRBO, I think, very similar. So I went in, I got this farmhouse, which had just been like basically, I think they took a field and they built a cottage. I mean, it was brand new in the middle of a field. There were cows in the front yard, a lake and like a pond in the back. with a dock, and I use that as my navigating space. I use that as my
I'm all,
navigate. I use that as my navigating space. From
yeah,
there, I went around, and it was just like pristine, and it was so new. It was like, yeah, it was also my one of my first. Well, I don't know if it was my first experience, but it was one of my first experiences of watching TV, watching American shows in Swedish.
yes,
So so I remember I've seen like the Flintstones and I don't know how many different languages, in
yeah,
Star Trek too. And I just remember like Star Trek, and and the Flintstones and different things. And it's always so much fun to watch those types of shows in a foreign language.
I agree with you.
Mhm.
I've done it myself. Actually, the first time that I did it was when we moved into Plattsburgh, New York, because a lot of the stuff up there is broadcast both in English and French. So there are a couple of
Mm.
stations that are out of Montreal that you can get from there that were 100% French, but it was kind of interesting to see Deputy Dog, ça va bien, ça va bien, ça va bien. Always a deeper voice than what we
I know it's like instead of Wilma, it was Vilma, like
with a V.
with a V, and it was just so. I've tried a few times to watch movies that I've watched before in English, and I'll try to watch them in a foreign language. And sometimes, especially when you know the actors and the actresses' voices, it's
Yep.
just so disconcerting because you're sitting there going like, "This just doesn't sound like Robert De Niro, for example, or whoever." Yeah, and it's so. But it is a good way to learn a language if you want to learn another language.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. I think uh, getting back to this trip, there were a lot of aha moments for me. At my age, if I get one every so often, it's pretty cool. But they were popping all day long every day. I really the thing that stood out to me the most, Jan, was just how generous people are and loving. Um, at, at a distance, we get an opportunity. I do to have people say nice things on a Facebook post or to send an email or something like that. But up close and personal, I just was so moved by how happy everyone was to see me. You know what I mean? I don't know how to describe it other than I truly felt like I had won some kind of a make a wish. And
Well,
I went from place to place to place, and I was just so soul fed for the whole 2 weeks by whoever I saw with big smiling grins, a lot of laughter, a lot of love. And the, the the primary reason for going this time is I have a couple of buddies that have well, there's three of them, and they have the types of cancers that they're just not going to get well. Okay, it's called How Much Can We Slow It Down, and how much life can we squeeze into between now and then before things start to functionally fail. And what was very cool about it was being taken aside. It's almost like they called each other and said, "Hey, Bill's going to be there. Let's make sure you let him know that we appreciate that he came because the guys really got up for the game.
mm.
They just plain had a ball and played real hard, and we couldn't tell that they were suffering or their health was failing at all, and that was really cool for the whole family. Do you know what I mean?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, that's beautiful, Bill, to be able one is to allow yourself to go,
Yeah,
because I think we always tend to push stuff out. Like it's like, oh, I don't have time. This is more important. Not that there is anything more important than that, but I think, our mind plays tricks on us. And then all of a sudden we're like pushing stuff out. It's interesting because I think sometimes, I tend to, in a lot of ways, I tend to be a very private person. And so sometimes you realize that I don't think people quite understand your reasoning for why you do things.
Yeah.
And unless you share it, obviously, which like we do here. But I think sometimes with family members or friends, not that we take it for granted that they're going to understand, but I think that for whatever reason, we don't want to disappoint them. We don't want to, like, there's always a myriad of reasoning that we kind of don't open up. And so I'm a few weeks ago was there was a party for my nephew's bar mitzvah.
Hmm.
So I go, and my uncle is there, and he lives in Westchester. And every year on Father's Day, he throws this really big shindig. Like, I mean, it's all first cousins, second cousins. It's like 60 people now. And he has this spectacular house. So on the Sound. So, I mean, it's really, really beautiful. So last year I didn't go because it was the year my father died. And I decided that I really wanted a private day to just spend remembering him, and
Yeah.
so I didn't go. And so this year, um, my uncle asked me when I was there. He's like, "Am I going to see you on Father's Day?" And I said, "Yeah, you'll see me." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're coming." And I realized that last year, I really don't think I said much. I just think for whatever reason, whether was because it was a hard year for me and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be like during Father's Day, which was part of the reason I didn't go, was I really didn't know how I was going to feel, and I didn't want to put that pressure on myself to feel good if that wasn't the way I felt. I just wanted, if I wanted to be sad, I wanted the ability to be sad
Yeah.
and not have to feel like I had to put on a mask for any reason of
Right.
what I was feeling. And so I just realized that sometimes we have no idea. We kind of, for whatever reason, we don't share. And I think that that's just call for a lot of like, I think he might have been hurt the way he said it, that I hadn't gone last year. And I thought to myself, it would have been a lot better off had I just picked up the phone and said, I'm not going to come this year. And this is why I'm not going to come.
Yeah.
And it just made me realize how often we do that as individuals, that we don't necessarily share what's deep in our reasoning or our reasons for doing things. And just it ends up causing, sometimes I think, some hard feelings or some whatever, when there's really, I'm sure if I had explained it to him, he wouldn't have been upset.
Yeah. What I hear in that also is that you and I have habits that come from how we live, and there are circumstances like when we're talking to professionals online or on a Zoom meeting or something like that, we might have a little bit more of a thoughtful way to explain to somebody what we're doing and how and why, but maybe not so much with distant family, especially if they live a long way away, where we sort of have our habits on a daily basis. Well, guess what, they're doing the same thing over there, and
Hmm.
so it's like none of I mean, some of us just have a conversation every once in a while, and it's either to share little stories or maybe insights into world events or things that are occurring. But sometimes it's just the facts, ma'am, and move
Hmm.
on. And then we have these extraordinary opportunities to open up completely and find, I think, new chambers inside of ourselves that we don't know are there, or have forgotten them, and lost the key to the door. And then all of a sudden they just get opened up by being face to face with somebody that I really care about and they really care about me. And we didn't remember it until we sat down across from each other over food and a cocktail or a glass of wine or a beer or something, or maybe just even water, but it opens up this whole kind of um, a talk path. Like what comes to mind is the Get Smart cone of silence, where Maxwell Smart and the chief would put this big plastic thing over their heads that had kind of like a pipe between the two of them, so that nobody could hear what they were saying when they were exchanging secrets. except for when we're out at a restaurant, we're exchanging secrets and sometimes at the top of our voice, and we don't care if anybody else hears our secrets or not, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when we're on cell phones, we're all like all the time. All of a sudden, you hear people's entire conversations, or I know that people will look around and I'll think to myself, oh my gosh, that person is listening to me. And we have no idea how loud we are or how we just, we've
Yeah.
come across. And so we're like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden.
Well, I did notice that a couple of times. Well, in different circumstances with different people, all of a sudden we were just having so much fun. Oh, there are other people here.
Yeah, no, that I think happens sometimes. 'Cause it also depends on where you're from, like what part of the country you're from, because sometimes people are much more reserved, and other areas, people are a lot louder and
Yeah.
a lot more outspoken, just and so we always laugh, my friends and I always laugh because all of a sudden we'll realize like how loud we are. And we'll be like, oh, that's, we're here. We have to kind of tone it down a little bit. It's a little bit too
Yeah.
more, much more prim and proper or whatever, as opposed to what we're used to, So,
Well, one of the fun benefits of doing this trip the way that I did, first of all, it was quite a deal for me to just get that car to a place where I could drive it confidently without worrying about any mishaps, mechanically. And then what I did is I posted on Facebook where was. I always do that anyway. If I go out to lunch with somebody, I'll post, we're here, we are, we're talking about life, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I told you there were maybe six, maybe seven people that were on my really would like to see list. Well, the rest of the folks were all folks that saw that I was doing this on Facebook and said, "Hey, if you're going to be in South Carolina over here, you go by CNT, you better stop by and see me or I'll get you." And just really cool stuff like that. And so um, I I put a lot of miles on the car in 2 weeks, but had an extraordinary time and saw so many wonderful people. And many of them were just like these magical little gifts. I would never have thought, yeah, we should put them on the list to go and see because they'll be too busy and all that head stuff you were talking about earlier that we all have. Um, it just worked. It came together. There were these things that couldn't possibly have happened, and then they did.
I love that. But I think sometimes, I mean, I don't usually publicize. I mean, unless maybe I was going abroad or whatever, or I knew there was a particular area I was going to where there might be people I knew. I tend not to like overly publicize when I'm not going to be home.
Yeah.
It's just not me. So
I don't really
but
tell a lot of people, Jan. There's only like 7,500 of them on Facebook. So
and I sit there and I'm like a lot quieter about that than maybe a lot of people, but I'm like, it's okay. I
yeah,
have to, it's perfectly fine.
it's better than fine. And that's what gives the spice of life is that we're not all the same.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that was one of the neat things about all the folks that I got together with. There were just so many different personalities and so many um so much neat stuff for me to listen to and learn. And
Hmm.
I told people, I said, I'm doing this because I want to learn some new things here. And so couple of them, a couple gals told me I'll be more than happy to teach you.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that I was reading something recently and it was very much about that. It was, well, I think I was also doing a meditation. Um, I've been meditating a lot more. And a friend of mine had a really great idea because I tend to journal. And when I'm in a negative space and I journal, a lot of like negativity comes out. So if I happen to glance back, it's actually quite depressing. So I was like, it's great if it's a brain dump and I have no purpose but to like empty what's in my head. But it's not. So he said, journal after you meditate. So I've been doing a lot of guided meditations and chants and stuff like that. So it's been a lot more fun, or a lot more positive to journal afterwards. But it's so- in one of the guided meditations, long story short, in one of the guided meditations, it was talking about that whole idea of you know uniqueness and celebrating, and that we're not all the same. And I think we spend a lot of time in our lives thinking, I don't know, but it's just kind of a weird state of you know standing out and not standing out, and acceptance of ourselves, and you know it mattering to us whether we're accepted by others. And that's
Yeah.
why, having people in your life that kind of do accept you, um, for who you are, is so is so nice. It's kind of like, oh, they just, I can just be myself with that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And not to put words in your mouth, but I almost lost track of who I was the whole time I was traveling. There wasn't really like any me that I was noticing, like, or somebody would say something and I would say, well, that's not me. Or, those kind of responses that come automatically, you have no control over. I just was kind of in awe of how much fun we were having, the neat sights. Everybody wanted to to drive me around and show me different cool stuff. As long as I was going to be in their neck of the woods in Florida or South Carolina or North Carolina or Georgia or wherever the heck it was, they had special things that meant something to them that they wanted to make sure I got to experience. And
Mhm.
so
But
a general
that's
was really, really great.
always great. It's like these places that, like, I mean, even when people come to visit you, or taking, like, my mom's been up, and she's from Connecticut, so but I'll take her on these drives or whatever, and we see things that you know we haven't, you know areas that we haven't seen, or that I go by, or that are near me. And there's something about that that's really, it's like showing them a deeper part of your soul that you don't normally get to show other people.
Well, see, that's the thought I was having too, was that what was common with these folks that's different than how I operate up here was I drove to their world in my car, and then I spent sometimes upwards of 24 hours with them, either staying overnight at their home, or staying nearby, or just getting up and leaving and going and getting a motel room.
Hmm.
But what was really cool about it was, when you really get to know somebody is when you're riding around in the car with them for 5 or 6 hours, and just having random conversations that get brought on by what you see and what you go past. I saw some extraordinary sights up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. There's this
Hmm.
thing called the Blue Ridge Parkway that I think
Yep.
if you haven't done it, you need to. It's not the Rockies, and it's not Alaska, but it's the Blue Ridge Mountains, guys, so they make songs about it for some reason, and now I know why.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are a few drives that I've done through the years which were just like, or a few places I've been which just take your breath away.
Yeah.
And I know you've been to Colorado, and when I went to, um, you know, the Rocky Mountain National Park, and just driving around, some moose. I mean, it was just spectacular. And I remember I went in like May or something, but I just remember there being snow like up to the car doors, and the roads were clear, but there was just this tremendous amount of snow. So it was just, but I've been other places where I just feel like that I just are so like that for me.
Yeah.
But that's
So
beautiful that you got to experience it.
And the other thing that happened too was you were talking about your thoughts and everything on the anniversary of, of your dad and some things that happened with him and a birthday and stuff. And so the anniversary of my dad's passing was not quite 2 weeks ago on June 1st, and I was down and I didn't even notice it, until about 3 o'clock that day. And then I thought to myself, I thought, wow, what a great way to just honor his memory by being here. And at that particular time, I was with I think Raleigh and Ellen, and they had these two trees that they had put these cactus type plants on, and they are called a night blooming cereus. Have you heard of those? They're also known as the queen of the night, and they
Mm,
have these blossoms. Each one of the buds bloom one time after 9 o'clock at night, and by the following morning they're completely wilted and gone. That's all you get. They're not one of those the flowers that open and close and open and close. But when I got there, Ellen said, "It's a darn shame that you're not here a couple of days later because they're going to probably go into full bloom this weekend." And I'll be darned if there weren't about 30 or 40 of those blossoms that opened that night just for me. It was extraordinary. And I thought to myself, what a wonderful way, to recall where I was and what I went through and all of the some feelings of all about dad for a moment. And
well,
yeah,
yeah, and it reminded me of, I intentionally did this. I mean, for me, was the anniversary of my dad's death, and I did something that I think I shared with you that I would have done with him, and it's the same thing I did on Father's Day. It
right,
was, I mean, I spent a day going to places, um, or doing something that he would have absolutely we would have done together as kids and stuff. And it was just my way to kind of keep him with me on that day, always, but especially on that day.
right.
And, I think that that's a really, there's something about that, yeah, something about that.
Well, you and I are still learning, aren't we?
Oh, yes, big time.
This thing called life, it's not something you can ever master. You can master wanting to master it, but the whole notion of ever completely understanding and being in a position of no reaction or controlled reaction, or I understand what's going to happen now and the predictions always come. That's not how human beings work.
You know,
So I think the whole idea of growing as a person, um, it's not something I think you stop growing when you become reclusive and you step back from life and the world. And that may seem like it puts things into a more controllable and more predictable, and maybe to a certain extent, a mundane kind of a circumstance that's familiar and more than acceptable for a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? There,
hmm
there are a lot of people who are very interested in having things be the same way with no mystery every day.
yeah, or just having, yeah, or my favorite is like, I try to prevent myself from saying this, but because it's kind of like a useless thing, that is, especially when it's regarding things like, I don't know, progress and things. It's like, oh, things were better before. And in some ways they are, but it's not like we can, it is what it is, and we've got to move forward from it and learn how to, like, work with what we have and, in some way maybe rejuvenate what was. But saying, like, let's go back 50 years ago, it's not going to happen. We can't go back.
Yeah.
As much as we want to, sometimes, it doesn't work like that. Progress is progress. And sometimes that progress has what we might call negativity or something negative that happens as a result. But I think it is possible to learn and grow from a place of advancement.
Yeah.
I think we can use like cell phones. I think cell phones are amazing. I think we can do amazing things, but there's also a time and a place for them, and kind of thing.
Well, if you examine the whole notion of going through life having circumstances occur, some of which you like and some of which you don't like, there's that. Okay. So you'll have like a low level reaction to everything. What I mean is an unexamined reaction to things, such as being upset with something, or really having a good time with something, or missing out completely on it because you were focused on something else. But if you kind of make your mind up that whatever you go through on a daily basis, this is what I do, and it's really useful for me from a few different standpoints. But I decide in advance that I'm just going to have the best day ever, and no matter what happens, how good it is or how bad it is not typically something that I even notice or act on. There's either something to do, or there's not something to do, or there's something to appreciate, or there's something to, just experience, And it's quite different than being upset in the moment by an occurrence that you'd rather not have happen. And
Hmm.
it's taken me years to get to this place, but I would say for the most part, even getting some really, really bad news about something that I wanted to go a different way, I don't have a real, you know, amplitude to my reaction like the lows and the highs. It's more like I can appreciate that there's now something else for me to do here, as
Hmm.
opposed to, oh, well, that well, to be use the vernacular of the realm. I mean, some people would just say, well, that really sucks. I mean, for God's sake, why can't things go easy every once in a while? Being in that space is a little bit different than going, holy mackerel, we didn't get it done. Let's do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm there yet, to be honest, I, but I do. But it's something I work at, and um, gives me something to work toward. Um, but lately, I've been, like I said, meditation, and I've been doing this meditation, which or listening to it's called, like, what you talk about is like kind of this is of like setting up my day, and so it's like priming it to be positive versus it's a better place to start no matter what happens.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's for me, it's a listing of intentions,
Mhm.
and I think some people would call those hopes. I hope this happens. I hope that happens, or if I'm lucky, or that sort of thing. For me, it's more like I want some movement around this particular topic, or this would be some really, really good news to get today or tomorrow, one way or the other, to either up or down. And so when I do that, it's like putting together a to-do list of intentions, things that I can be thinking about and attracting, if you will.
Well, that's how like this is. It seems to be what I'm like, you know, focusing on. You know, g- Gratitude for something that has happened already, and then what would you like to happen, and envisioning that has already happened, whatever it is, like positive thing. What would you like to have? And so it kind of sets you up in a much more, at least for me, a much more positive space versus, I don't know, whatever else you might think about, which is, can be negative, can be, And sometimes I'm just looking for that for my meditation. I've always been looking for almost like that feeling of emptiness, like
Sure.
just space, like where there are what I call space between my thoughts versus, my brain on rush hour traffic versus my brain on Sunday traffic. Which
That's
is
a
just that's a
yeah,
what?
I said that's an notion.
Notion, right? Yeah. So yeah, just to have that. But lately, it's been much more focused on me trying to keep in that, set myself up in a positive place.
Yeah, maybe what you could do is kind of talk me through the thought process of that. What just hit me as a new notion, how do you do it?
Well, which one? The quieting my thoughts or the because the other one is really done. I'm listening to somebody, so it's a guided meditation. So it's
Okay,
listening to the words and attaching and literally asking the question of like, okay, in this moment, name three things that you think about that you're grateful for. Could be yesterday, it could be 20 years ago, and then think about three, something that you would like to happen,
right.
and envision it, feel it, visualize it. And when I do it for the feeling of emptiness, it's much more just trying to find a quiet space within myself, focusing on my breath. Sometimes I do that in different ways. I'll do that through my senses. So I'll do it through, trying to take notice of everything that's, in my space, like the sounds, the smells, and then kind of going to that which is, once you kind of notice it and it's there, it's almost like you don't hear it anymore. It's like you concentrate on it and it almost becomes so it's almost like when someone's snoring and all of a sudden you incorporate that into a dream. That's the way I think of it. It's like all of a sudden you're just like a lawnmower in your dream because there's someone in the background snoring, it's like you incorporate it in. So I think about it as just that feeling of where those sounds almost you become one with it, and that whole sensation of the body of just feeling your body expand and contract. And there is a very much a quiet, and I can get there quite quickly, but when I find and I you know find that when I'm in a like, let's say I'm having a hard time, I it's much harder for me to get there. So I'm much better off listening to someone else guide me because it gives me something to focus on. Their voice, the words they say. There is like an almost like an objective, and that might be to think of something I'm thankful for, but it's in quiet. And then lately I've been actually doing some chants and mantras that are just, for me, I listen to Sanskrit mantras or, but it also, there's something about the vibration of the words that's really a high vibration. And then my last way is sometimes, I use different things or all of the above, depending on, I've been doing like, longer meditations with different things. And then sometimes I use essential oils a lot because they're calming. Our brain can't smell something and actually think at the same time. It's just, if we really smell something, we're truly present and we're not really thinking of much else. So those are just my useful ones.
I was sitting here doing exactly what you were talking about,
I
and
thought so.
yes, and almost falling asleep, to the sound of your voice, which was quite comforting.
Yeah, it's funny whenever I talk people through grounding or meditation or whatever.
Yeah.
Tonka tends to calm down. It's almost like mom has her meditation yoga voice going there. Can chill out now. It'll be like he's out. It's always really funny as I like take pictures of him, like when I teach or if I bring him to a client. And all of a sudden, the other day, I had a picture of like he's on a blanket, like sacked out at my client's house. My client is totally like in his zone, and I'm like, it's like really funny.
The animals are so appreciated. There were several different places where they had dogs. I don't recall anybody having any cats, but the first place I went to, they've got a chocolate lab that's about a year and a half old, big 90-pound puppy. Oh my goodness. And he's a drooler, so he slobbers all over the place. He's a chocolate lab mostly, and I don't know if he's a cross with something. They don't know either because he's a rescue puppy. But what a really, really rambunctious boy! A lot of energy, and they still haven't quite got all the training down with him. And uh, so there was that. And the dog was always all over me the whole time I was there. Just really loved Bill, loved my beard, had to come over and drool on my leg. How can you not love that puppy, right?
Oh my
So then
gosh.
I get to the place where I was staying this weekend, and they have five dogs. They've got two 14-year-old men. One of them is a whippet, and the other one is kind of a cross between a Springer Spaniel and a pointer. They're beautiful old men. They just so quiet, and you know. But then there's three beagles. There goes the neighborhood. you know because one of them gets to baying, and she was a scary one of the group, and whenever I walked into the room, she would act startled, and then she'd start her routine with at the top of her lungs, and then all of them would have to do it. What are we doing? Where's the threat?
Right, right.
But by the time the third day got there, um, she was in my lap. She just loved me. She came over and she just put her head upside down on my lap. I scritched the underside of. She was so comfortable, and not scared of Bill at all anymore.
Well,
So
it's so funny because I never spent much time around a beagles, and then like, wow, the howling is just like takes on a
crazy.
whole. It's crazy, and I thought to myself, and then the person I knew lived in quite a secluded area, and I kind of understood why. Because
Yeah.
it's
Well,
really loud.
well, they make a very, very good burglar alarm system. There's no they're second to none in terms of letting you know there's something going on. Whether it's dangerous or not, now that's another deal. But
Uh,
just anything going on.
well, my neighbors always say that I never have to worry that like Tonka's like there in a flash and
Yeah.
bark and bark and barking, and they're like, and every now and then when I see somebody and he's in the house, and I think to myself, like I see somebody outside, and I think to myself, well, he's going to bark now, and then he barks, and I still jump because it's so loud. I'm like, just makes me laugh. But
Well, all I can say is that I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight. There's no question about it. And
I'm
I want to thank you for that little brief 20-second whatever it was that I was doing. I was completely out of my body listening to you and focusing on what you were saying. It was wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. If anybody ever wants to join me for one, just feel free to connect. I just like it's one of my favorite things to do
I
is
highly
to
recommend it, folks.
it's one of my favorite things to do to get people into that space. So and the thing is that it's something that we can do, throughout our day. It's not something you have to do in the morning or evening. You're going through you have a moment where you're like, okay, I could really use this right now. Life's getting a little too overwhelming, or I have I need a little bit of just space. Um, that's just it's perfect. It doesn't cost anything per se,
No.
you know. I mean, unless you're going to set up a session with me, but otherwise, once I teach it to you, it's something that you can do for minutes or seconds, and it doesn't have to be a long period either. It was just like 2 minutes or something when we just did it now.
Yeah, it was
Mhm.
wonderful.
Oh,
So, any declarations to the universe today?
no, I think just like what you always say, Bill, is reach out to somebody and you know see what happens if you share something with someone. Maybe someone that something that you're going through, or be a little bit more, I want to say, just communicative about certain things, like, and just see how it works for you.
Mhm. Take a chance, in other words.
Hmm.
Yeah, take a chance and do say it out loud and be willing to be thought a fool.
That's right. That's right. Hey, we've all been there.
Well, I've got nothing to add, and I think
Okay.
we've had again another extraordinary get together. My gas tank, personally, from my physical being is on low at the moment, but I feel so energized and revived now. I thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
But in the meantime, just to like let you all remember, um, a word or two can shift the whole day, and just give yourself the gift of being joyful in your life, and maybe take a moment or two each day and really investigate, um, the feeling that you're having right at that time. Like, where's it coming from, and what's it
Hmm.
feel like? If it had a color, what would it be? Was it hot or is it cold? Just see if you can get a little bit into the feeling, to where you're analytical about it and not at the mercy of the feeling, if you will.
Hmm. I mean, I always loved doing. I mean, for a long time, I did a practice. It was sort of a form of therapy that I did with a friend of mine, which was called Haukumi,
Yeah.
and it's very much like that. It's like, okay, this is where it is in your body. This is the color it has. Is it dense or is it like spacious? And is it, and just really kind of is its own. It is a somatic expression of it usually, like you feel it in your body, and it tends to give you the ability to diffuse it a little bit. I also find it really good because sometimes we can't articulate it, what we're feeling, and it just allows you to start to process it. I guess is a really great word. Process it in a way,
Yeah.
even if you can't articulate it at the moment.
Yeah. And maybe there's a step in there that's just observation and noticing, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and to see if there are words in your vocabulary that you can use to describe. And sometimes you might even have to invent a word, that's kind of really captures the essence of the feeling. But
And
it,
as you're saying that, Bill, one thing that um, comes to my mind first and foremost, which I tell people all the time, and that is to ask yourself the questions of like, how am I feeling?
yeah,
Um, I don't really know that we do that um, on a regular basis for whatever reason. Sometimes we feel like it's being selfish because we're not supposed to be thinking of ourselves and we're supposed to be thinking of others, or for whatever reason. But those are really important questions. And that could be how you're feeling physically, but it could also obviously be like, how am I feeling emotionally?
yeah.
Um, and, and I remember when I first started to talk to people about that, it was like, well, how am I, how are you feeling? So,
The closer you can get to some sort of a sense or a feeling on the inside of yourself, that the identification has occurred, it makes it well, it can cause it to disappear. It can cause it to be a friend that you can call up if you like it, or it's something that you possibly could ignore if it's not working for you. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but I think in the meantime, I like your in treatment of people to just reach out to other folks, be a little mindful of that, and to share and to take chances.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, bye everyone. I'm gonna end it there.
Yes, you are. We are lighting the candle, a world that works. My dear friend Jan Jeremias, and I'm Bill Correll. Thank you all for listening. God bless all of you. We love you. Bye
Yes,
for
we
now.
do.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.